The motel reeked of damp carpet and old regrets. The kind of place where the air conditioner never worked right, where the air was too still, and every surface seemed to hold the weight of strangers' stories. A faint hum came from a tired lamp in the corner, its light struggling through a yellowed shade. In the bathroom, the soap was the kind that crumbled at the edges and smelled faintly of chemicals, pretending to be citrus. A cigarette burn on the bedspread caught my eye when I first walked in. One small, round mark. Proof that someone before me had been careless, or maybe too desperate to notice. That's how I felt. I was already wedged between them, one body behind me, one in front. My back pressed to a chest that radiated steady heat. Hands at my hips, warm, firm, certain. Their skin was fevered against mine, and I wasn't sure if it was the broken air conditioning or the way my own body was trembling. One mouth found mine, hard, searching, almost greedy. The other's grip on my waist tightened, as though I might vanish if he didn't hold on, and I didn't move. Not because I didn't want to. God, I wanted to. But because I felt like the smallest shift might break the fragile, electric thing we had stepped into. Earlier, my voice had been steady when I'd said it. Only if you take turns. And they had agreed. It didn't feel like crossing a line. No, it felt like giving in to something I'd been running from for too long. Like falling, not into trouble, but into a truth I'd been denying myself. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't pushed or cornered. I was right there, aware, alive, wanting. And that's the part I still can't explain. Not to them, not to anyone, not even to myself. I was 39, recently divorced, emotionally hollowed out in a way that time alone hadn't been able to fix. 15 months without anyone touching me in a way that felt like warmth instead of obligation. I'd convinced myself I was fine, that healing just needed space, that loneliness was something you could learn to live inside. But healing, I'd learned, can be quiet to the point of cruelty. It can become a room with no windows, no sound, no sign of life. And then, suddenly, without warning, two people step into it and look at you like you're not a broken thing at all. Like you're fire. You want to know who they were? Ben and Colby, not brothers by blood, foster brothers who had aged out of the system but never let go of each other. I'd met them because they were helping me remodel the cabin I got in the divorce. 2 weeks of long days in dusty jeans, paint on their hands, sweat at their temples. The quiet, unshakable strength of men who knew how to build and fix things outside themselves at least. Ben was the older one, calm, steady, the kind of man whose silences felt deliberate. His eyes caught everything without needing to comment on it. Colby was lighter on the surface, joking often, though his humor sometimes dipped into something sharp, something he didn't let stay long. They worked side by side like they had been doing it forever. And over those days, they treated me like I wasn't fragile or in recovery from anything. Just a person, not divorced, not abandoned, not someone to pity. Just me. The motel wasn't part of the plan. It was a thunderstorm that did it, the kind of summer storm that comes in fast and violent, swallowing the roads in water before you've had time to close the windows. We had just stripped the drywall from the main room of the cabin when the rain hit. By the time we packed up, the road back to town was already flooded. Ben was the one who suggested the roadside motel. His voice was casual when he said it, but his eyes, I saw something there, and I knew it wasn't casual at all. Still, I said yes. Still, I packed a small overnight bag. Still, I got into their truck, my heart hammering like I was 16 again. The room had 2 beds, but I only remember one. At first, there was nothing but laughter. All of us dripping from the rain, Colby kicking off his wet shoes, muttering about the flickering light. But the laughter settled quickly, leaving a silence that felt heavy. Not uncomfortable exactly. More like a waiting room where everyone already knows the outcome. Ben handed me a towel. His fingers brushed mine just barely, but my stomach flipped like I'd been touched in a much more dangerous way. Colby sprawled back on one of the beds, still barefoot, watching me. "This night's already weird," he said, almost daring. "Might as well say what we're all thinking." I looked at him, then at Ben, and without thinking, without knowing why, I said it. "Only if you take turns." The pause that followed felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. It broke when Ben stepped toward me, slow but certain, and Colby pushed himself upright. I don't remember whose hands touched me first, only that I was already shaking, and they both felt it. One mouth found the hollow of my collarbone. The other lifted my shirt like it was a ritual. My breath caught in sharp bursts. My legs parted without thought. There was no small talk, no laughter now, only movement, skin over skin. The shifting weight of the bed under us. Fingers tracing my ribs, breath against my ear. It wasn't rough. It wasn't tender. It was urgent. Like all 3 of us were carrying something too heavy for one person, and this was how we shared the load. Ben's chest pressed to my back. The rasp of Colby's voice when he groaned into my neck. Their hands didn't compete for me. They held me in place, kept me steady. One touched while the other watched, and I let them. Because I wanted to. Because I needed to. It didn't feel dirty. It felt like oxygen. Like being wanted so much it hurt. Like being found when you'd forgotten you were lost. We didn't touch the second bed. We didn't talk about what it meant. It was limbs tangled without hesitation. Whispered breath in the dark. The salt of sweat on skin. Somewhere between the rush and the quiet, something inside me broke open. Not in pain, but like a locked window finally giving way to the wind. The week after the motel, I didn't call them. Ben sent one text, "You okay?" I stared at it for hours, thumb hovering, deleting it without replying. Colby didn't text at all. Somehow, that silence hurt worse. I tried to make sense of it, to pin it down in my mind as a mistake, something that had happened because of the storm, a cheap vodka, or because loneliness can make you do things you wouldn't normally do. But the truth, the one I didn't want to say out loud, was that I'd wanted it. I still did. The cabin was supposed to be my fresh start. It sat alone on a slope at the edge of Pine Hollow, half an hour from town. Trees wrapped around it, like they were keeping it for themselves. I'd bought it with what was left of the settlement, knowing it needed more work than I had the skill for. No running water at first, The porch sagged. Inside, the walls were cracked and papered with damp stains. I didn't care. I wanted silence. I wanted something that belonged to me. I didn't expect company. I'd met Ben at the hardware store. I was standing in the aisle staring at drywall compound like it might assemble itself if I waited long enough. He'd overheard me asking the cashier how to patch a hole and stepped in. "You'll need more than that," he said. A week later, he was at my cabin with a truckload of tools. Colby showed up 2 days after that, a ladder on his shoulder, grin easy, like he belonged there. They were kind, capable, and, I thought at the time, uncomplicated. But kindness is dangerous when you've been untouched for over a year, especially when it comes from men who could lift you without effort, and who looked at you like you weren't a broken thing, but something waiting to be rebuilt. The divorce had ended quietly. No screaming, no betrayal, just the slow decay of two people who forgot how to be soft with each other. He stopped asking how I was. I stopped expecting him to notice when I skipped meals. We stopped touching, and neither of us said a word about it. The final straw wasn't a fight. It was a Tuesday morning when I watched him leave for work and realized I didn't care if he came back. After it ended, people told me the usual things. Time will heal you. Focus on yourself. You're stronger than you think. They didn't tell me that healing is boring, that it's long days of laundry and eating alone, that you start falling asleep with the TV on just so your house doesn't feel like it's swallowing you. They didn't tell me that sometimes you would give anything, to feel wanted, even if it's fleeting, even if it costs you later. The morning after the motel, I sat on the cabin's porch with coffee gone cold between my hands. The woods were still wet from the storm. I kept expecting to hear a truck in the drive, to see one of them get out like nothing had happened, ready to measure boards or sand walls. But the day stayed empty, and the quiet was louder than anything else. By Friday, I couldn't stand it anymore. I drove into town, not for groceries, not for hardware, just to be somewhere with people, somewhere I might hear my own name spoken. Ben was at the hardware store, leaning on the counter, flipping through a catalog. When he saw me, he didn't flinch, didn't smile, just said, "Hey." I tried to keep my voice even. "I thought we were going to finish the trim this week." "I thought you'd quit," he said. "Didn't know what you wanted." I looked down at my hands, dry knuckles, chipped polish. "I don't know either." His eyes softened, but he didn't push. After a moment, he said, "Cole's been quiet too." I nodded, throat tightening. "Maybe we broke something," I said. Ben shook his head. "Maybe we uncovered something." That night, I drove home with the windows down. The wind stung my eyes until I realized I was crying, not sobbing, just leaking, because for the first time in months, someone had looked at me and not turned away from what I'd become. 2 days later, they were back, standing on my porch, like the storm had never happened. Ben had a drill in hand. Colby carried a bag of screws and a box of donuts. "Back to work?" Colby asked, eyebrow raised. I nodded, but my hands shook because I knew we weren't just rebuilding the cabin anymore. We worked that afternoon like we had before, cutting baseboards, measuring paneling, laughing about the outlet in the back room that sparked every time you looked at it wrong. But each time one of them passed close enough for me to feel their heat, my chest tightened. Colby's arm, brushing mine, made my breath catch. Ben's voice behind me made my stomach twist. And the air got thick again. Not from dust, not from heat, from memory. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, the kitchen was littered with scraps of wood, half-empty coffee mugs, and a tape measure stretched across the counter like a taut wire. Colby leaned over the counter, pencil between his teeth, marking the cut. Ben was beside the fridge, wiping sweat from his neck with the hem of his shirt. That little lift of fabric revealed a strip of skin, warm gold in the fading light. I told myself I wasn't looking, but my eyes betrayed me. "Cut's too short," Colby said, glancing up at me. I blinked, not sure I'd even heard him. "The board," he clarified, smirking. "You okay? You look somewhere else?" I swallowed. "I'm fine, just tired." Ben's voice came from behind me, deep and steady. "Then we should wrap up. No point pushing it, if you can't focus." That should have been the end of it, but instead, the air felt heavy again. The kind that presses against your skin until you're hyper-aware of every inch of yourself. I stepped toward the sink to rinse a mug. Colby was already there. We froze, both holding the same thought in the same still moment. Move or don't. He didn't. Neither did I. The space between us was barely enough for breath. I could feel the warmth radiating off him, smell the faint trace of sawdust clinging to his shirt. Ben's footsteps crossed the kitchen slowly, deliberately, like he knew exactly what was happening. I didn't turn, just felt him come up behind me, close enough that the air between us shifted. His hand brushed my hip. Not enough to claim, not enough to push, just a reminder that he was there, that they were there. And my pulse, God, my pulse was a hammer. "We could finish the trim tomorrow," Ben said quietly, his voice almost grazing my ear. Colby's hand reached past me, slow, to set the mug on the counter. "Or tonight," Colby added, eyes fixed on mine. There was no mistaking the double edge in his voice. My breath was shallow. My grip on the edge of the counter tightened. I could have told them to stop. I could have made a joke, broken the spell. But I didn't, because some spells aren't meant to be broken. That night, I lay in bed wide awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the heat of Colby's arm, the weight of Ben's presence, the unsaid between us swelling until it was too big to ignore. Outside, the forest was still. Inside, I was anything but. I didn't know who knocked first. One moment, the house was silent. The next, there was the faint creak of the floorboards just outside my bedroom door. A pause. Then another sound, a low, deliberate knock. I sat up, heart thudding against my ribs. The door didn't open until I said, barely above a whisper, "Come in." It was Ben, and behind him, Colby. Neither spoke. They just stood there, the dim hall light carving shadows over their faces. Ben closed the door. Colby locked it. And I knew that second night didn't feel like the motel. Desperate, sudden, a spark catching dry leaves. It was slower, measured, every touch drawn out, until I thought I might come apart from anticipation alone. Ben moved first. Not fast, not urgent, just deliberate. His hand brushed my jaw, tilting my face toward his. The weight of his gaze was enough to pin me in place, though my breath kept tripping over itself. Colby stepped closer from behind, his presence a shadow and a warmth, all at once. It was the kind of closeness you feel without touch, when someone is near enough that you sense their heartbeat in the air. No one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because words would have shattered the balance. And none of us were ready to lose it. Ben's thumb traced night cheekbone, slow, like he was memorizing its curve. Colby's hand rested lightly at my hip, his fingers barely there. A suggestion, not a command. Every nerve in my body was awake. Not the frantic, dizzy heat of the motel, but something steadier, like standing at the edge of deep water, knowing the first step will take you under. Ben leaned in, and the world narrowed to the sound of breath. His, mine, Colby's behind me. It wasn't just about touch. It was about permission. The unspoken kind, passed between glances and pauses. The kind that says, I want this. I want you. And I'm not looking away. Colby's voice broke the silence, low, careful. Tell us if you want to stop. I didn't. Instead, I let myself tip forward into the gravity they'd created. Ben's palm pressed against the small of my back, steadying me. Colby's fingers curled, just enough to hold me where I was. And I realized this wasn't about filling a void. It was about being seen, not as a project to fix, not as a divorcee licking her wounds, but as a woman with heat still under her skin. The minutes stretched long. Shadows shifted across the room. I couldn't tell where one touch ended and another began, only that the air was charged, my pulse relentless, my breath caught between wanting more and fearing what more would mean. At some point, Ben's hand slid down my arm until his fingers laced with mine. Colby's other hand came to rest at the curve of my shoulder. 2 points of contact, 2 anchors, and me suspended between them, weightless and entirely theirs in that moment. It didn't spiral into chaos. It wasn't frantic. It was a slow burn that kept smoldering, feeding on the smallest movements, the way Ben's thumb circled the inside of my wrist, the way Colby's breath moved the hair at the back of my neck. Time lost its edges. I don't know if we stayed like that for 5 minutes or 50, but I know that when I finally closed my eyes, it wasn't from exhaustion. It was from surrender. By the time the night was over, the cabin felt different. Not rebuilt, not renewed, but inhabited. Like some part of me I thought I'd buried deep had been coaxed back to the surface, still warm, still alive. And in the quiet that followed, I realized, whatever we'd started, it wasn't ending here. Morning came too soon. The light in the cabin was pale, hesitant, as if it knew what it was waking up to. Ben was in the kitchen, his back to me, moving quietly enough that the floorboards didn't complain. Colby was outside, stacking the leftover wood in neat piles, his movements quick and precise, like order could keep the night from unraveling. I stayed at the edge of the doorway for a long time, just watching them. It didn't feel like last night had been a mistake, but it didn't feel simple either. The air was different. Not awkward, not yet, but charged in a way that made every glance carry too much meaning. Ben noticed me first. "Coffee's ready," he said, his voice level, too level. I crossed the room, the smell of dark roast curling up into my senses, grounding me. Colby came back in, brushing sawdust from his hands, his eyes flicking to mine just long enough to send a ripple through my stomach. We didn't talk about it. Not at breakfast, not while we worked through the late morning, putting up the last bits of trim and sanding the window frames. But the silence wasn't empty. It was thick, and under it was a pulse, something none of us wanted to name yet. Around noon, Ben stepped outside to take a phone call. Colby was by the workbench, tightening a clamp on one of the boards. I moved closer, handing him the screwdriver without thinking. Our fingers brushed. It shouldn't have felt like anything, but it did. He glanced toward the door, making sure Ben was still outside, then leaned just a fraction closer. "You okay?" he asked. It was such a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. I nodded, though the truth was, I didn't know. By the time Ben came back in, the moment was gone, but the echo of it stayed with me. Days passed. The work on the cabin finished. We laughed at dinner, played cards in the evenings, fell into an easy rhythm. And yet, every time Colby's hand brushed mine, or Ben's eyes lingered a second too long, I felt the memory of that night pulse beneath the surface like an ember. Then, one evening, I walked into the living room and froze. Ben was on the sofa, Colby beside him, too close. Their heads bent together over something I couldn't see. They didn't hear me at first. When they did, they both looked up, and something in their expressions told me I wasn't supposed to have seen whatever I just had. That's when the first crack appeared. It was small, invisible, maybe to anyone else. But I felt it. The shift. The way the room seemed to cool just a little. Like I was no longer inside whatever this was. I was standing on the edge of it, looking in. It started with little things. A glance I wasn't meant to catch. A whisper in the kitchen that cut off the moment I walked in. Ben's sudden habit of taking calls outside, even when it was freezing. Colby's silences grew longer, too. Not the comfortable kind we'd shared while working on the cabin, but stretched, taut, like something was straining beneath the surface. One night, I came back from a walk and saw them through the window. Ben's hand was on Colby's knee, not a casual pat, a still, deliberate hold, the kind that says more than words. Colby didn't move it away. When they noticed me, they sprang apart too quickly, too guilty. Inside, Ben acted normal, or at least he tried. "How was your walk?" he asked, smiling like nothing was wrong. But the thing about smiles, once you know what to look for, you can see exactly where they crack. A breaking point came late, after midnight. I'd gone to the kitchen for water and heard voices from the living room. Low, urgent. I stayed in the shadows, just far enough not to be seen. Ben's voice first. "We can't keep doing this in front of her." Colby's reply, sharper. "She's not stupid. She knows." Ben sighed, heavy enough to sag the air. "It was supposed to be the three of us, but you've changed." "You." Colby cut him off. "No, you changed. You wanted more from me than you ever wanted from her." The words lodged in my chest like a stone. I didn't go in. I didn't confront them. I just stood there, letting their voices thread through me until the truth was undeniable. I went back to my room, closed the door, and locked it. Not to keep them out, but to keep myself from walking back in and pretending it wasn't happening. I didn't sleep that night. Every replay made the words sharper, colder, impossible to sand down. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't carry it anymore. They were both in the kitchen when I came out, Ben pouring coffee like it was just another morning, Colby leaning against the counter, scrolling his phone. Two men who had changed everything and were acting like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. Then I asked, stay but low, "How long?" Ben froze. Colby's phone slid from his hand to the counter with a dull thud. "What?" Ben asked, but his voice cracked halfway through the word. "How long?" I repeated. "Have the two of you been, whatever this is?" The silence that followed was worse than any answer. Colby looked at Ben first, like they were deciding who would speak. Ben stepped forward. "It's not what you think." "Don't," I cut in. "If you tell me it's not what I think, you're either lying or you're insulting me." Colby rubbed the back of his neck. "It started after that night," he admitted, tone almost defiant. "You knew something was between us." I laughed, sharp, humorless. What I knew was that something was between all of us. That night was supposed to mean something to me too. Ben flinched. "It did mean something," he said, softer now. "But it changed. We didn't plan for this." "That's the problem," I said, my voice low and shaking. "You didn't plan for me. I was just the middle ground you both used to get to each other. I wasn't looking for fair. I was looking for honest." The coffee pot hissed, the only sound in the room. I realized in that moment there was nothing left to salvage. Not the trust, not the warmth, not the illusion that night had given me. They hadn't just broken something between us. They'd broken something in me. I put my mug down without drinking from it, the ceramic clinking against the counter, louder than it should have been. "You'll finish the cabin without me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm done." I didn't wait for them to stop me, didn't look back to see their faces. I walked out into the cold morning air, the frost biting at my lungs, and kept moving until the cabin was just a shadow behind me.